So today I will try to talk to you a little bit about the experimental part of our project. So I titled this Influence of Effective Angle of Attack on Flapping Wing Aerodynamics. That is in broad strokes what I'll talk about. So I'll show you all the experimental work that we did so far in our project. So let's give you a bit of a framework. So let's start with the absolute basics. Why does the robot produce thrust? Well, this movie will look vaguely familiar to you because Stefano just showed it hours ago. There are two main parts that I would like to zoom in on here that you see happening. You see that there are vortices being generated on the wing surface, and they are subsequently being shed into the wake. So from this we can see, and whether or not that happens depends on roughly the Struhal number. So how fast am I flapping and at what amplitude relative to the speed of my incoming flow. And also what is my effective angle of attack throughout the cycle. So if you flap, you induce a certain angle of attack. By pitching you can either make that worse or make that better. So those are the two knobs that I can turn at. So in my presentation today I will show you a bit about what is the effect of this wake formation on the formation of lift or thrust on my wing. And in addition, I'll show you, do we generate these large vortices on the rover? This is a 2D case. Does it happen in 3D? And if so, what does it matter? Is it good that that happens? Is it not good? So let's start. Here's a brief overview. I'll start with a wake model that I made with potential flow theory, or as I should say that Harry Hoeymakers developed, that we can use as a exploration tool for our experimental space. Then I'll show you some measurements that we use to validate this wake model. And then I'll show you some measurements on the wing surface. So with some luck we'll see a leading edge vortex today. I won't yet tell you if you do. That's only for me to know. So, chapter 1, wake research. What we did is we made a very basic numerical model with potential flow theory. So, if you're not familiar, the philosophy to potential flow theory is that you make some assumptions about your flow, such as inviscid flow and incompressible flow, but most importantly, irrotational flow. That allows you to squeeze certain flow phenomena. So it really allows you to squeeze your vorticity field and your source and mass flows to singular sources. So lines, points, what have you. And what we did here is we modeled the wing from the wing itself, our lifting surface, as a vortex. So a vortex that interacts with a free stream, according to Kutyakovsky, is capable of producing lift. So there you have a lifting surface. To then close the model to our wake model, we modeled the rest of the wing. So from our lifting filament to the trailing edge as a doublet sheet. The wake itself, again, is a doublet sheet. Using this analogy, we can then simulate vortex shedding from the wing into this wake. So there you have your complete wake model, so to say. And one thing to notice is that it's completely in 2D. So everything that happens, we project it on one single 2D plane. And shedding is enforced by the Kuta condition. So that's all that we have. So there is a linear relation between lift and effective angle of attack. We have a plane that gives us our wake, and that's all there is to it. Well, there's a lot more to go into, but I don't have the time. And what this model can give us, really, is it can give us two things. It can give us lift and thrust forces, and it can also give us some idea of what the wake is supposed to look like in a flapping wing problem. So in this case, I've made a color scale where you can see the strength of this dipole sheet. The lines that you see are vortex lines. And in this particular case, you can see that ring vortices are generated at each wing. Never mind that for now. But the most important result here was that it was fairly easy to start playing with Struhal numbers and with pitching angles. And from that we could find optimal values for thrust, for required power, and for propulsive efficiency. And we really used that to see what experiments do we need to do to do relevant experiments at all. And that is where we got this minus 60 degrees angle from that Alex already showed you. Then I promised I would talk about experiments, and I cannot stress enough how much we've grown in this project on the experimental part. So we started with this. Here you can see a low-speed laser and 2 high-speed cameras. That was the bane of my existence during my master thesis. We couldn't measure too fast because the laser couldn't do it. We couldn't measure too slow because the cameras couldn't do it. We had to do everything inside the tunnel, so I was in the wind tunnel while this high-power laser was on. The only protection was, well, safety glasses and hopefully common sense. During this project we really moved up from that a bit. So here you can see a laser-guided arm. So we no longer had to move this huge laser head around in space, but we had a nice optical articulated arm, just a system of mirrors to get the laser beam where we wanted it to go. Also, at the end of it is now a high-speed laser. And again, you can see our high-speed cameras. And this time around, we could do everything necessary from outside the tunnel with all the required safety precautions. Much better already. And then the final iteration, of course, was our PTV measurements with helium-filled soap bubbles. So here you can see, as Alexander already said, our cameras, our laser, our OptiTrack system.
I always say Luuk is the most expensive of all the PhD students.
Unfortunately, right? Yes?
Sorry, I'm naive about that. So what is the laser for?
Right, so let me get to that. So if you are not familiar with particle-based velocimetry, which is not that weird, I'll explain it in a nutshell. So let's say that you want to determine wind speed, but all you have is a camera. Then what do you need to do? Well, let's say, for example, that this series of a bird is something that you filmed yourself, and you know what the interframe time was, you know what the distance is between each different picture of the bird. Then with the simple definition of velocity, you can determine the velocity of the bird at any time. If we want to apply this to air, what we need is we put small particles in the flow that ideally should follow the flow perfectly. We need cameras, and we need illumination. And this is where the laser comes in. You need very short pulsed illumination, and it needs to be very intense, so therefore you land at lasers. So a PIV result that I would like to share is we were capable of doing measurements in the wake of a flapping wing. And we used that to, at least to some degree, validate the wake model that we had. And here you can see what in our measurements the vorticity is shed behind the flapping wing. And we compare that to the vorticity that is shed in our model. And what you can see is that at the very least the sign of the shed vorticity is correct. Magnitude is not so much yet. And if we look at a cross section of it, you can see that it already, again, it corresponds fairly well. So on the top you see an experimental result, and on the bottom you see an idealized result where I took the liberty of plotting the strength of the vortex sheet on a sine. So this is not our model, but this helps you see is there something that looks like an inverted von Karman vortex sheet, for example. Moving on, so when we ramped up complexity a little bit, we had to start adapting our experimental setup. So, like Stefano already said, we had to move to new tracer particles. So PIV tracers are very small, 1 micrometer. To be able to do measurements on a larger volume, we needed better particles. So particles that reflected more light. And for this we turned to helium-filled soap bubbles. So the way that works is you put small nozzle arrays in the settling chamber of your wind tunnel, and you turn the system on and it starts blowing thousands of bubbles per second. These bubbles are transported to your measurement section. So here it has the letter C. You can see a picture of our wing there. And at that point you illuminate the particles with your laser. You film them with, in our case, 4 cameras. And by triangulation algorithms, you can then determine the location of every particle in time. And by other methods, such as Kalman filtering and more classic particle tracking algorithms, you can determine the position of each particle in time. And that, of course, also gives you a velocity field if you do it correctly. So some results we got from that. The main result that we got from that actually is that we found a large vortex attached to the wing on its upstroke on the bottom side. So here you can see a cross-section at the root section of the wing. So on the bottom left I show you where on the wing I'm looking, and the larger picture is the top view of that section. And here you can see that the vortex does form near the root. It detaches near the tip, and here it's fully detached. And this is at a screw hole number of 0.33, which is slightly above cruise condition of the robird and most mammals. Then the next question is, what happens to the other side of the wing? Do we see any vortices there? Well, let's look. Not here yet. Also not here yet. So that is strange. So a leading edge vortex could enhance lift if it is stably attached to the top side of the wing. But we see one on the bottom side of the wing. What the hell is that supposed to mean? Does it fly down? So what we did is we binned together all of these particle track data. We converted it to a vector field, and we used a more conventional vortex detection criterion, in this case the Lambda 2 criterion, to see if we could get any kind of idea of what was going on here. And in this way we found a vortex, or at least a vortical structure, that starts near the mid-wing section of the wing, and then it turns into the tip vortex before it reaches the tip. Well, setting aside what to make of all this, one thing I would like to show you also is all the challenges that we had to overcome to even do these measurements. So first of all, we started with a setup where we had the cameras stably attached to the wind tunnel, and on that same wind tunnel we mounted a flapping wing, so that introduced all kinds of vibrations, and our calibration just turned to mush, like within 2 measurements. So we had to build a separate frame for it. We very carefully selected the right size rubber feet for it, and then we had to put a huge weight on there to dampen all of the vibrations coming from the tunnel as much as we could. Then the new tracer particles are great because they reflect more light, but of course there's also a downside. They are slightly heavier than air, and that gives us the following problem. We don't see that many, if at all, tracer particles in the core of our vortices. Not that great. Data is a bit more sparse than, for example, for PIV. But also we had a lot of issues with laser reflections, so
3.0.
Exactly. So Alexander already briefly touched upon it. He said we had to make the wing extremely black, or we would get very strong reflections. So as you can imagine, the reflection from a very tiny bubble is a lot weaker than a reflection from a solid surface. Black isn't black enough. The right black just doesn't exist. Then there's not enough particles, there's too many particles, and so forth. So fine-tuning the system was quite difficult. And that was all I had to say for you today. I look forward to your questions.
See you, Jan. And so you see that, sometimes it's easier to work with equations. At least you know what you're doing, and you can predict things well if you know what you're doing. Okay, very nice talk, Luuk. Any questions for Luuk?
Yes.
No one asking. You showed the wake profile,
Mm-hmm.
the blue, the one of the wing. So yeah,
Yes.
that one precisely. So here, so that's the scalar vorticity, right? That we're seeing.
Correct. Yes.
So this means that in the bottom plot that the vorticity is this way, right? So the vorticity axis is this way, right?
Let's see. No, so this is vorticity with the vector pointing up, so from root to tip.
Okay.
Yes.
The vector is within the plane.
Within the
Yeah.
Okay.
So this is a ring vortex.
Okay. Because I was thinking that the vorticity is this way, so okay, no, that okay. No, that makes sense. Yeah.
No other question? Thank you very much. Yes,
Stefano,
Mark.
if you solve Navier-Stokes with a least squares formulation, least squares is able to determine a solution to an overdetermined system. And you have initially as many equations as unknowns, but you can always supplement it with a lot of experimental data. And then it finds a balance between your equations and his.
I try to use the experimental data matching the model.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is interesting, and also, how could you in fact use the methods at a certain level and project it on the kind of, that's something definitely that we
You
want
can give
to
weights
do.
if you have more confidence in
Yeah.
the experiment, you give it a larger weight.
Yeah. Sure. Eventually, that's what we wanted to do. Unfortunately, then we will not have enough time to do it within the project, but it's something definitely. Because eventually, of course, we wanted to have then the theory and then some numerics and then see how the two things would connect doing things like this. But of course, time is up. I will do it anyhow. I think finding other means. Yeah.
Some work that is already being done to that extent is called the vortex in cell method. It doesn't use the Port-Hamiltonian framework, of course, but it is this combination between numerics and experimental data that you're referring to.
And also what I think we discussed with Luuk, we use software which is shaking a box and other commercial software, which is again a black box. And I don't know how good these guys were, so to speak. As we did for the discretization in numerics, I think if you have measuring, there is a lot of theory and knowledge about filtering and all these kind of things. So we actually have a student now that is started already, right?
Next week.
Next week. So we look really at open source alternative on these things, because then we actually then know what the hell the software is doing and what we could do better. That's what we should be doing at the university, right? Because if you want to understand these kind of things, because we have now a fantastic setup for the measurement, we have a lot of good data, but how this is elaborated is a bit of a black box. I don't like black boxes. I want to understand what's in there. Yeah. And then of course you can look what the advantage is, how you can couple it to numerics and blah blah blah. Yeah. Great. Thanks a lot, Luuk.